For over 33 months, Russia has been at war with Ukraine, and today we'll examine the military situation there. I am Julian Röpke, you're watching BILD Situation Room. And once again, we start with images from yesterday morning. Russia launched another massive missile attack across all of Ukraine. Here we can observe one of the missiles that impacted the western Ukrainian city of Rivne. Filmed from a relief distribution center, we are witnessing an Kh-101 cruise missile being shot down right here over the skies of Rivne. And it initially looks like a last-second rescue because this rocket didn't ignite. The problem is only for the Ukrainians. She had cluster munitions on board. That means it had a lot of small warheads on board, which are now raining down on the power plant or the distribution station meant to hit here. We can now see bright flashes. Now we're observing the station's complete destruction. Soon you'll notice that all the lights in the right side building go out. This means that Russia has once again successfully managed to target the power plant with this attack and thereby further ensured that the energy supply was significantly restricted. Don't be surprised, the lights are still on here because, of course, this aid organization uses a diesel-powered generator to keep working at night. That wasn't how it was in the houses close by. In any case, following another attack, the Ukrainian government then announced that we must ration electricity even more strictly now. In many parts of the country, it's now such that you have 2 hours of electricity, then 4 hours without, and so on. And that rotates throughout the entire country or through the different districts to somehow at least provide enough electricity to have power available for a certain part of the daily life for all its residents. Ukraine is actively responding to this, having once again attacked Russian oil infrastructure earlier this morning. We are observing footage here from the town of Kaminsky, located in the Rostov region, which is southeast of Ukraine. And we see once again a refinery being hit here. These are quite interesting shots because just a few days ago, President Zelensky had explained on television that the Biden government was not happy, as he said, not happy about the fact that so much Russian gas and oil infrastructure was attacked, because this naturally also affected the international gas and oil prices. Nonetheless, now that Biden is not around for much longer, Ukraine seems to be drawing new strength here, and it might not have as many reservations with President Trump, and it's still unclear exactly what Trump thinks about it. So that's some more footage again from Kaminsky this morning. 2 additional oil tanks are still burning intensely here, continuing to blaze even hours after the Ukrainian attack on the Rostov region. We are continuing on from Rostov to Kursk, where we take a look at new footage that clearly shows us just how crucial the ongoing nighttime work of the Ukrainian units in that area truly is to halt the Russian advance or at least slow it down. We now have footage here showing the results of special forces, including those of the 225th Battalion. In that specific footage, they reveal to us that, yet again, roads have been mined which the Russians mistakenly believed had no mines left on them. And this likely happened through remote mining. That means we see new Russian columns here, again many infantry fighting vehicles, and they are primarily driving over mines, as mentioned. Roads, where they were under the impression, at least we had previously heard from some Russian bloggers that there don't seem to be any mines here anymore. In that sense, the Ukrainian army, as I mentioned earlier, uses special units that either deploy drones or utilize special artillery guns, or sometimes directly employ commando units on the ground to lay fresh mines in that area every single night, where the Russians think they can safely drive through, and we see these massive explosions. This indicates that several infantry fighting vehicles of the Russian forces are being destroyed here, causing quite significant losses on their side. We can now see some daytime footage of it once again and clearly notice that the vehicles actually exploded in sequence, so it seems there was no response again. We can take a look at it here now and then from another perspective. Here, these dragon's teeth have been strategically laid out. This means that the Russian vehicles essentially only had the option to proceed along this specific road, and that's precisely where the entire area was mined. That means it was kind of a trap that the Ukrainians set up here at night. We'll watch it again from various viewpoints to effectively halt the Russians precisely at that spot. It is most likely the case that the Russians themselves laid these dragon's teeth as a way to halt Ukrainian troops. But we know Ukraine got through rather successfully at the year's start. Here we see it again from a different perspective. The dragon's teeth go from left to right. The road exclusively navigates through that exact location, precisely at the point where it becomes feasible for armored vehicles to actually make the crossing. That's precisely where the Ukrainians covertly laid mines once more during the night, utilizing drones among other methods. And in this case, it has triggered yet another disastrous situation within the Russian army. We'll also see more attacks with kamikaze drones shortly, but first let's take a look at this incredible destruction that happens when usually lightly armored combat vehicles with the Russians. In this particular case, we're dealing with BMP-2 or BMD-2 or similar models. When these vehicles pass through such zones, the hulls are breached by the extremely powerful force of the mines, which is deployed there. This highlights once again how crucial it is to maintain a strong defense of Kursk, and also demonstrates that we still have witnessed very, very few territorial changes in that area. This means that we still face the situation where approximately 50% of the territory held by the Ukrainian army in August is still under their control today, since the Russians are persistently attempting from all sides to advance there. Moreover, it is also clearly observable down there that in Plekovo it persisted for a very long time. In August, the territory held by Ukraine stretched almost all the way to Giri, and all this extensive area is now again firmly under Russian control. That means they're attempting to advance, progressing place by place, but they must do so for each village, with roughly 40 or 30 under Russian-Ukrainian control. For each of these villages, you'd have to sacrifice about 5 to 10 armored infantry fighting vehicles and around 500 men or so. Therefore, it's still a notably challenging situation for the Russian army, not only within Russia itself, but also in the broader region of eastern Ukraine. We are observing yet another attack carried out by the Russian army near Limun, with a particular focus placed on the Torske region. This is one of the places where the Russians are trying to push the front further westwards, and in this case towards the Oskil River. And once again, it's not entirely clear, or probably indeed puzzling, why they carried out mining efforts here while the Russians already believed there were no more remaining mines. Since we see destroyed vehicles here, Russian tanks and armored vehicles. However, we see that the Russian vehicles keep driving over new mines. There we see it, a complete destruction of another main battle tank as we observe there. That means there really is no change in the Russian strategy. It's always astonishing, even though the war has been going on for almost 3 years now. Yet you persist in driving into regions loaded with a massive number of tanks and consequently more. To personnel, among whom none truly know with certainty if the area has already been completely demined. Maybe even from those commanders saying, yeah, maybe they're still mined, but that doesn't matter at all. You just have to make your way through the last mine, essentially cleared with your powerful tanks. You also repeatedly see Ukrainian tanks trying to resist. Of course, only after a large part of the Russian fleet was destroyed here, and after the infantry are traveling alone and are therefore relatively defenseless against the Ukrainian tanks. And we can see that the vehicles which were initially immobilized here that could no longer move and have largely already been abandoned, that they are then subsequently attacked by FPV drones, ensuring that they cannot be recovered covertly under the cover of night or even be repurposed by the Russian army at any later point in time. All in all, yes, really bizarre footage once again, which really shows that in some areas the Russian army is learning a lot. That's where they change their tactics a lot. For instance, they've learned to use these FAB 500 bombs in such a way that it actually works to push the Ukrainians back very far. In other areas, these crude and blunt mass attacks persist, frequently leading to the loss of as much as 90% of the resources and human lives deployed in those operations. And at this moment, it's always very important we stop the video again, because now it shows how all the infantrymen who have to hide are moving left and right of their wrecks, how they are being killed one by Ukrainian grenades and drones. That means it's not only just a massive loss, as we recently observed again with 4 or 5 more armored vehicles being affected, but it typically involves around 40 up to 50 soldiers each time, who are involved each time. These are weaknesses of the Russian army. We also want to look at the Ukrainian army's weaknesses, because these also need to be continuously identified, and they manifest in the 2 cases we are about to examine through nearly empty defense installations. And these are things that one just doesn't understand, that defenses were built over months, that a lot was invested in terms of effort, manpower, and of course money to construct defenses in this area, and ultimately these defensive structures were simply abandoned and left empty. We have another scene here from the village of Bereski, which is north of Kurakova. Kurakova is situated here on the south side of the reservoir, and on the north side below us now, right under the drone's view, you can clearly see the village of Bereski. And Bereski was actually one of the places where the Ukrainians wanted to hold off the Russians, because they said, we really have strong defense lines built there. I paid a visit to Bereski in September, and at that time we were informed that they had been diligently making preparations for the Russian invasion or attack for several months, planning to intercept them with their massive and strategic defense installations. And now we're about to see precisely what these defenses look like. They consist of very large trench systems. Here you can see it, those that are constructed into the ground here, yet they have been fortified, strengthened with concrete. And we also have these large command bunkers repeatedly. This means it's possible for the Ukrainians to pull back here and discuss the defense. There are indeed bunkers that are totally secure against FPV drone attacks. You'd need a precise artillery hit to take them out. They are really extremely capable and resilient bunkers. Only we perceive the issue here. There are hardly any Ukrainian soldiers stationed in these bunkers. The situation is insane. We just witnessed it. There's a Russian soldier and about 3 soldiers attacking. There are a few more of them down there. And he just tosses a hand grenade straight into this area here. You never know if a Ukrainian might be there, but there isn't. And these are truly very strange scenes. We see that the Russians wait for a moment, the grenade explodes, but there's no one there. If someone had actually been there, they might have ended up injured. The bunkers extend deeply and are very well secured over on this left side here. But there's just no one there. And those are really strange recordings. The Russians are at present storming these facilities, and it seems once again as though someone in Ukraine has apparently made a definite decision here. After months of building up and investing countless hours of work into these facilities, we see how huge they are. I can capture that briefly here again. So these are the facilities where the Russians were supposed to be held off for many weeks or even months. Now we see it. These are really huge facilities that were just left like that, and you keep wondering what was the idea behind leaving them like that. Did someone want to give up the whole thing, or did they not find it serious enough to defend the region, or are there simply no men left? The last point seems unlikely. As anyone familiar with Ukraine knows, there are about 1 million soldiers there actively on duty and moving across the country, but just not here. At the front and in the facilities. Here we now see a recording that possibly 3 Ukrainian soldiers were inside one of these facilities. So these 3 soldiers were actually supposed to man this particular bunker. However, at that moment, they are directly and aggressively attacked by an FPV drone right in that location. We see some soldiers here in Ukraine moving around in those houses. That's indeed the case. When I journeyed to Beresky, I similarly observed that in some of those houses, naturally the soldiers were also residing there. And we can see accordingly that heavy artillery is now being used here by the Russian side to destroy these houses. Accordingly. That means once again the Ukrainians apparently tried with few soldiers, a handful, maybe, who knows, maybe 20, 30, to defend this place. And now we see the entire complex once again, which is really quite remarkable. You can clearly see that a great deal of effort and work has gone into maintaining this entire setup. However, the whole area was then stormed by the Russian army. Beresky is now under Russian control, and we can see that at the end of the footage. Here, there's also a Ukrainian vehicle that was somehow in closer proximity and then ended up being attacked. But we are at the end of the recordings, where at the western edge of Beresky, then the red flag reminiscent of the Soviet flag of the 114th Brigade of the Russian army was hoisted here. Again, we see more urban combat, but that also seems to be taken as a precaution. We see no Ukrainian soldiers defending themselves here, no Ukrainian soldiers surrendering, and accordingly these entire recordings here are not really clear. Finally, as mentioned, the Russian flag is raised here, the entire propaganda video. We see the summary again and see that Beresky is now under Russian control, and there are additional, accordingly 2 or 3 kilometers that the Russians advance westward. Let's also look at it on the map and see that Beresky was extremely important in preventing the Russians from attacking Kurakova from the north and eventually from the west as well. Since Beresky was the last place north of this reservoir, as we just saw, that could have somehow defended the much larger Kurakova on the south side of the reservoir. From now on, the Russians only have 3 kilometers left to basically circle around Kurakova, pass by the northern edge, and then surround the city. And of course, this cannot be in Ukraine's interest. Nonetheless, it has happened once again, and the footage once more raises questions about what Ukraine's strategy for defending the Donbas actually looks like. We only go a few kilometers further, down here to Velika Novosilka, and we also have Russian footage there, which conveys a very similar situation to us, at least initially. Here we see Russian footage of a kamikaze drone, specifically a moving one. It's referred to as Krot, which means toad, if I'm not mistaken in the translation. And this particular kamikaze drone is currently making its way into a building right here. And this building should indeed actually be manned by the Ukrainian army. It's one of the very last remaining structures directly in front of Velika Novosilka, which is only a few hundred meters away from the town center itself. And now we see here how this drone is driving in there. That means actually this position should now, or actually when this drone, here we see it, drives into the position, and if it had been manned, the position, then we'd have a big problem here. We're about to see the explosion. After the drone just made its way into the house, we'll allow it to play through for a moment. That entire scenario would lead to casualties if soldiers were present. Still, the situation strangely feels surreal as we see it explode, so we're going to take a moment to rewind it briefly. Once again, as we can see from these recordings, there are absolutely no Ukrainian soldiers here. Here again, there are ditches. These ditches point to the east, and the road continues west towards Velika Novosilka. And here, there should actually have been a Ukrainian defense post, a checkpoint, one of the last, as I said, right before the city. However, if that were the case, as we just saw, the drone drove around here, then drove in here, entered the house, then, of course, some soldier would have seen it all, and the drone could have been stopped, or at least soldiers running away would have been seen. We don't see any of that in this footage. This implies that the position, fortunately for the Ukrainians in this instance, was apparently unmanned, and no one was present there. And the focus is on defending the city. It's truly peculiar footage that consistently leaves a number of questions unanswered, particularly regarding what strategies Ukraine is considering to protect and defend its urban areas effectively. Let's take a look at the map and see that. These shots that we just saw came directly from Velika Novosilka, specifically from this small road that is hiding here under the W. This is one of the two streets that lead into the city. The southern one has already been directly captured by the Russians, and this is the northern or northeastern one. And now the Russian forces have successfully managed to reach the very outskirts of the city directly. And yes, at present, the intense fighting continues unabated right at the entrance of the town. Lastly, let's look at the Pokrovsk region, where a city of 65,000, still held by Ukraine, is located. Near Pokrovsk is Selidova, and we remember a few weeks ago the Russian army already took Selidova. However, these recordings show us not only that the Ukrainians are still holding their position right in front of Selidova, that actually happened here in the city, but they also demonstrate to us, once again, the remarkable precision and the various possibilities you have when you have a skilled drone pilot who masters his craft. We now see here that a kamikaze drone is approaching a completely destroyed house in Selidova. We can see up ahead, fairly well hidden under various debris, probably a T-72 tank from the Russian army. We've observed now that the T-72 tank fires in this area, which undeniably indicates that it presumes Ukrainian soldiers are stationed at a distance of at most 2 kilometers ahead. This tells us something about the front line near Selidova, but we also see that there isn't a single Russian soldier here monitoring it, watching, that you might be under attack, and that's exactly what's happening. Here, kind of from behind, if you will, this kamikaze drone is approaching, and we're even seeing in the last moment, like the hatch, here we can see it clearly, the hatch of the tank commander here on the upper side, how it is now being securely closed because apparently someone heard the incoming drone. Accordingly, this hatch is now closed, so they're trying to get to safety. However, the armor is quite thin, which naturally means that the impact of the kamikaze drone directly results in a fire breaking out inside the T-72 tank. So, this once again shows that with these FPV kamikaze drones, you can not only attack on broad fields in open spaces when vehicles are moving, but it is really possible even a concealed, in this particular instance, partially protected vehicle, which is actually from a tree, so to speak, and shielded by a nearby house, maneuvering in such a precise manner that it effectively results in maximum possible losses on the Russian side. And that's exactly why the Ukrainians are increasingly investing in these small but deadly kamikaze drones.